The intergalactic predator. Beyond the human galaxy, beyond the range of man-made spacecraft and astrotelepathy, lies the unspeakable cold of the intergalactic void. Few have ventured into this realm, and none have ever returned. It is the great barrier that divides galaxy from galaxy, a place where time and space conspire to hold the worlds apart with inconceivable distances. Yet, the void is no longer empty. An immeasurably ancient and implacable intelligence moves through the cold and the darkness, its many eyes fixed on the distant glittering lights of our galaxy. The Great Devourer moves between the stars and hungers for the flesh of all who lie before it. This great organism, this monstrous entity, it is known as the Tyranid race. Even by naming the Great Devourer, civilizations betray their ignorance. Every thought and action, every spark of life in the Tyranid race is bound and interlinked into a single mind, a single great entity that stretches out light years of space and is controlled by the immortal hive mind. 1 billion times 1 billion Tyranids stand at the rim of the galaxy. Yet, each one is no more than a single cell in the living body of the hive mind, the devourer of worlds. Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the factions, forces, and formations of the Warhammer 40k setting. The grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. And don't forget that I also do mythology, links in the description. It's actually quite good, or so we're told anyway. A helpful reminder for those who wish to broaden their horizons in a fun and relaxing way. And today, we shall be taking a brief look at some of the details to come from the first codex for 10th edition. Alas, not a great deal has changed, so I've included the story element, and some tracts covering things I have not done recently or thoroughly. For it is sometimes fun to see what the new official lore is, despite it covering issues already extant in the setting. Yet, please do not worry, I am attempting to pen more luxurious entries. Unfortunately, I have some work going on next door, 10 weeks now, so it's been a bit difficult to record. All coming soon though, and of course, October looms, one of my favourite times of the year. And so, let us proceed. To quote. Testimony of former Governor Jandid Tostot of the planet Hutos, recovered by Deathwatch Kill Team Akratos of Watch Fortress Mortgard, and presented to Inquisitor Gazakin Uzier of the Ordo Xenos. Thought of the day. Life is the Emperor's currency. Spend it well. It has been 4 months since they came. Twice since I abandoned my wife and daughters to save myself. I do not pray for forgiveness, for I am unworthy of it. I only beseech the most holy God Emperor that this record may survive the death that now rapidly engulfs my world, so that perhaps other territories of mankind may not suffer as ours has. That I, body and soul, am now damned is beyond all doubt. My fate, however, does not have to be shared by others. It began much longer than 4 months ago. the signs were inconspicuous, but they were there. Only in hindsight do I now see them. At the time I was ignorant, blissfully so, as were my generals, my advisors, my priests. Not one now lives, all probably little more than bubbling bio-gruel in some nutri-pit awaiting consumption by the bioships that dominate the skies above. What were the signs? Tectonic activity that toppled hab blocks, gravitic upheaval that cast orbital stations to the ground or flung them into deep space, bizarre tidal patterns that dried seas and drowned townships. Then there were the deaths and the disappearances. For many months they were merely the problem of local enforcement detachments, and I heard nothing of them. Until they grew numerous enough, that is. Rumors became known then of Xenos, Tyranid involvement. I dismissed them as nonsense. The actions of sabotage, the grisly murders, the weapon thefts, all were the malicious acts of malcontents, I declared, who would be hunted down and punished. There had been no known encounters with the Xenos in the entire subsector, and, thanks to the efforts of my ancestors and myself, Hutos was as well guarded as it ever had been. Then the shadow descended, and I knew how wrong I had been. We lost contact with our neighbouring worlds, Ozonst and Gedaglel, the Sinenfrar Anchorage naval base, as well as the Forge Moon Aleph B7. All had been staunch friends, our relationships with their masters built up over many centuries of careful diplomacy and generous aid. Once the ear-bleeding screaming of our astropaths finished, and the servitors scraped and washed away what little remained of the poor souls, there was total silence. It was as if we were the last human world in the galaxy. I kept this from the people, and most of my advisors. But I did not hide the monstrous ships. I could not deny the existence of the filth that plunged through our atmosphere, nor the vanguard beasts that stalked our lands and darkened our skies. I was informed that atmospheric scans claimed some 1 trillion tons of spore matter was released over us within a matter of days. Many were explosives, part of a preliminary bombardment that saw hundreds of thousands of souls melted by searing acids or pierced through with venomous spikes. A great portion were amniotic pods, filled with spawning fluids in which gestated savage, blade-limbed beasts. It was only weeks later, around the time that Gavila's keep and the spire of his everlasting greatness fell, that we gained a greater understanding of what the remaining spores did to our world. In the southern tundras, average temperatures had almost doubled, humidity the same. The Gaydin salt flats and Hularuth sand seas, devoid of life for millennia, now resembled forests of chitin-covered alien protrusions spouting out from the ground, many billowing clouds of yet more spores. Perversely, crop yields collapsed to all but nothing. Livestock succumbed to the foulness in the air in their millions. Hutos was a fortress world first and foremost. Every major settlement was a citadel, defended not only by high walls, nests of automated turret slaves, and armies of disciplined soldiery, but by secondary keeps and bastions. My family had proudly maintained these for 7 generations. All was for naught. Carefully grown ammunition stockpiles were exhausted at Fort Cairn and High Wall in hours. The barrels of anti-air weapons previously maintained to perfection melted with the sheer volume of fire my gunners put through them in an attempt to stop the colossal swarms of winged beasts that dominated our skies. The hordes were endless. From the spire of his boundless might, I saw tides of creatures that filled the landscape to the horizon. Towering monstrosities larger than our mightiest battle tanks, striding above the masses. I saw them sweep through forests and tear every tree down, as if it were some nation-sized avalanche. My world seethed with Xenos. Armoured relief columns were dispatched to the first bastions attacked, were rolled over by seas of claws and fangs, and things grew worse. The honoured citadel and the keep of St. Melihu both fell from within as bore holes opened in the ground behind their shielded walls, and sinuous clawed beasts poured out like a spreading pool of promethium. In the space of little more than 2 weeks, it was impossible to maneuver armies in the field. Every fortress not yet overrun by the Xenos was alone and under siege. Batteries of artillery beasts pounded our walls with living ordnance that rapidly ate at meters-thick walls. Miles of minefields were undone when the Xenos merely advanced through them. We cheered when first we saw the stupidity of the alien in action. Then we realized how the losses of even millions of creatures made no difference to our foes. In their wake came the ram beasts, the wall crawlers, the tunnel delvers, and the cannon haulers. How quickly did they seem to adapt to our defensive ploys and stratagems. Our meticulously planned bombardment patterns became all but worthless. They seemed to just know our garrison rotation routines that theoretically ensured all our soldiers were rested, attacking when some of our troops were exhausted and others not yet fully ready to take their place on the battlements. Or the Tyranids just never stopped attacking, making it all but impossible for our troops to recover and resupply as would be optimal and our strategies required. Of course we made alterations. Each change the Xenos learned more quickly than the last. One by one, our defences fell. The Golden Citadel, 3,000 years old. The Tide Guard, having overlooked the Jade Ocean for centuries, was toppled into the frothing waves below. Keep 25 vanished from the landscape, sinking into a huge pit. We boarded aircraft and fled. So many of us did, taking to mountain fastnesses and seaborne strongholds. The latter certainly proved no sanctuary. Monsters burst from the waves, their concentric circles of immense razor-sharp teeth rotating in opposite directions. They chewed through our craft with sickening ease. Winged nightmares descended from the spore clouds that blocked out the light of our star, drenching our craft and walls with gouts of acid, or bombarding them with hails of ravenous living ammunition and spore mines. It had been many weeks since a handful of us escaped the sinking of the sea fort Divine Anchor via airlift. We only escaped in this manner because the Tyranids had overwhelmed so much of our world. They no longer appeared to need to continue spawning beasts for aerial supremacy. I shall never forget what I saw from my craft's portholes. Alien biostructures dominated Hutos' surface. Gigantic lumpen barnacles pumped out clouds of matter to further poison the planet, alongside pulsating brain-like nodes that resembled lethal fungi. Immense capillary towers stretched high into the polished sky, the glittering chitin coating their flanks crawled over by chains of lesser beasts, fulfilling some sick alien purpose I cannot know. Digestion pools spread for miles, replacing our once great lakes with reservoirs of bubbling biomatter. Tides of creatures bloated with consumed flesh vomited their guts into the pools, or threw themselves entirely into the bilious liquid. Amidst the seas of feeder beasts consuming all in their path, we would see every so often an explosion or a burst of fire. Were these heroic final stands by other survivors, or merely abandoned ordnance detonating at random? I will never know. I cannot rejoice in the deaths they inflicted. The biomatter of the dead Xenos was surely recycled by the Xenos regardless, in no time at all. Our aircraft ran out of fuel a week ago. Now, I stand in the snow, not far from the peak of Mons St. Hilaire. I am the only one left that I know of. One by one, those with me perished. The slightest cut on a mountain rock resulted in an immediate infection that left the pilot in screaming agony. Her co-pilot fired the shot that ended her torture. My senior aide threw himself from a ledge, the reality that there was no escape hitting him. I have no idea what happened to my chief medic. Others were slain by lone beasts. The rest of us were able to kill or drive away. A justly deserved end will soon be mine. I have failed on every possible level. We were not even able to send word. An alien disease has me within its grip. My limbs are numb. My tongue is dry as sand. My head throbs. Even at these chill heights, I sweat profusely. From here, where I sit, I can see the final death unfold of the planet entrusted to me. Before me is the Rahadir Ocean. The water level is visibly dropping hour by hour. They are even taking our seas. There are enormous beasts with great, slowly flapping wings and immense open maws moving through the sky. I may be at high altitude, but the air is thinner here than it should be. I know enough of mountaineering to know that. They will not even leave our air. There is an isthmus I can see, upon which is sat one of the Xenos capillary towers. Now I believe I can tell what they are truly for. High up, foul Xenos bioships cling to their flanks like twisting calves at their mother's udders. They are feasting, I am sure. Hungry, filling themselves to burst on the hideous gruels that are what remain of my people. I have witnessed the planet's death, from sinister start to hideous conclusion. I see the power of our foe and, though I have shown boundless weakness these past months, I do not see how we ever could have won. End quote. Now let us hear about something that is rarely actually discussed, something I feel they have covered in greater detail in this codex. Just don't think of the Marigi from Sots when you hear it. To quote, Tyranid bioships. The vast emptiness of space is no barrier to the Tyranids' all-encompassing hunger. Each hive fleet consists of countless bioships, enormous space-swimming creatures whose grotesque forms are endless in diversity and function. No bioship is a truly single organism. Rather, each is a complex composition of dozens, if not hundreds, of different creatures. Every part, every organ and extremity is a specifically designed symbiotic bioconstruct operating under the single, unified consciousness of the bioship itself. Tyranid hive ships are found at the very heart of the hive fleets and serve as primary nodes for the hive mind, capable of directing the activity of unimaginable numbers of Tyranids. Most are biological factories, capable of not only creating millions of Tyranid organisms, but replicating genomes and splicing together new creatures perfectly adapted for each new world and threat they encounter. Rarely do they operate alone, each escorted by smaller void beasts who fight ferociously to protect their charge. Tremendous physical variety has been observed in hive ships. Living battering rams with frigate-sized horns and clad in layer after layer of adamantine tough chitin, pulverize orbital stations. Void beasts with colossal manta-like wings outstretch their appendages to block the light of the local star from a prey world. Razor-beaked ship killers hunt enemy void craft like murderous bloodfins of the deep. Bloated creatures loaded with spawning sacs launch waves of planet-choking swarms, mega flocks of winged organisms and clouds of living void mines capable of unleashing armor-melting bioplasm or hails of barbed thorns. And they are not alone. Other hive ships possess hyperactive adrenal glands, rendering them capable of traveling at phenomenal speed to intercept craft attempting to escape, or to more easily blockade a doomed prey world. Some possess impossibly large maws filled with thick bristles for harvesting every mote of bioplasm or valued resource from gas clouds and debris fields. Perhaps the most terrifying are those that appear to function as psychic beacons for their biofleet. These hive ships frequently boast pulsating cerebral nodes and project the shadow in the warp with particular vigor. Their weapons are unlike almost anything else in the galaxy. Though they can unleash ferocious warp blasts capable of obliterating enemy vessels, one of their most spine-shuddering abilities is to cause the crew of prey ships to experience horrifying hallucinations, crippling paranoia, and maddening terror. The Dark Interior. Boarding assaults are some of the most dangerous missions any warrior can undertake. To attack a Tyranid vessel is hideously more hazardous. Even supposedly dead bioships have proven lethal to those who boarded them without caution. The hyper-adaptive physiology of the Tyranids means that identifying a relatively safe point for a boarding craft to strike is incredibly difficult. Areas that prove ripe targets for assaults on one gargantuan void beast may be indistinguishable from those on another that turn out to be an acid sac or Morlock spawning chamber. Reports from boarders who have endured to recount their experience speak of vicious, dark conditions. There have been encounters with pulsating enphalic matter, creeping tentacles with black orbs for eyes, nests of needle-like teeth and chambers filled with filter-choking spores and toxic miasmas. Furthermore, survivors tell of bizarre gravitic and sonic effects, as well as clouds of biostatic that render scanning, navigational, and targeting equipment all but useless. Returned picked footage reveals palpitating tubules, glistening with alien excretions, throbbing translucent sacs and nests of barbed lashes through a bioship's gruesome innards. The very worst thing, so survivors say, is that the bioship itself knows its insides have been invaded, and reacts like any physical body trying to expel an infection. By sealing the opening channels within itself, the beast corrals its invaders where it wills. Those who escape entrapment and crushing when the walls of arterial passageways close in around them soon find corrosive ichor digestive juices, choking gases or vicious warrior organisms flooding the fleshy chambers they occupy. The Novel. Tyranid hive fleets do not travel through the warp. Nonetheless, they are capable of achieving great velocity when traversing interstellar space. This is thanks to small, almost innocuous bio-vessels classified by the Imperium as novels. A novel is almost completely defenseless, with little in the way of bioweaponry and a comparatively thin protective carapace. This is little consolation to the Tyranid's foes, for novels are always heavily protected. A cluster of monofilament spines on its bow enable it to interpret a wide range of sensory input, including an unbelievably broad spectrum of gravimetric signals. Using these senses, the novel can detect planetary systems at incredible distances. By means unknown to Imperial xenolographers, it can then harness that system's own gravity to create a compressed space transit corridor through which the Narval and nearby bio-vessels can cover immense distances. It cannot employ this method near too strong gravitational forces, as they drown out the more subtle traces that a Narval uses to navigate. As a result, a Tyranid biofleet must rely on more conventional propulsion in the final approach to a prey world. Whilst this combined propulsion method is slower than warp travel, it is infinitely more reliable. Furthermore, this method of interstellar travel has resulted in proving immensely difficult for the Imperium to track and detect Tyranid biofleets. Due to humanity's use of the warp, Imperial forces rarely situate auger stations or relays in the empty gulfs between star systems, instead focusing their efforts on near-system star scryers. Thus it is almost impossible for naval strategos to know where a biofleet is headed once it has departed a system. Though hypotheses that the most heavily populated nearby worlds are the targets have often proved accurate. The Narval's manipulation of a star system's underlying forces to direct Tyranid biofleets can cause terrible side effects. A prey planet will sometimes be subjected to earthquakes, solar flares, tidal waves, and other natural disasters in the time between the Narval casting its graphitic snare and the biofleet's arrival. This only benefits the Tyranid's efforts, guaranteeing as it does that the defenders of the target world will still be wrestling with planetary disaster or anarchic doomsday cults interpreting these events, perhaps correctly, as catastrophic omens when the bioships slither into orbit. End quote. Now for some smaller tracks that are woefully brief but important in the setting's development of the activities of the Great Devourer. To quote, Bloodhand's Skull Reap. Having long ago amassed an uncountable volume of human skulls, Rograk's Bloodhand of the World Eaters swore to collect a skull from every warrior species in the galaxy. His masterwork took a dramatic new turn with the coming of the Tyranids. Bloodhand made haste for the eastern fringe, leading his fleet directly into the path of the Hive fleet Kraken. The Hive mind has poured more and more warrior organisms into the subsector-sized abattoir of a conflict Bloodhand created, and word had spread amongst orc tribes, Drukhari, and Khorne worshippers alike. All seek bloodshed and spoils. Imperial observers have noted Hive Fleet Kraken has evolved a number of new strains of warrior organisms in this ever-growing bloodbath. Tendrils and splinter fleets battling blood-frenzied world eaters have become even more ferocious and savage. Those assailed by Drukhari raiders have developed incredible resistance to pain, venoms, and paralyzing toxins, and those engaged in attritional wars against the orcs have become greatly enlarged. The Maelstrom. Following Hive Fleet Leviathan's defeat at Baal, thanks to the Great Rift's emergence, thousands of bioships are scattered by empiric storms. Hundreds are cast into the Maelstrom, where Huron Blackheart, one of the most powerful heretic Astartes warlords in the galaxy, and the Lord of the Red Corsairs, rules. Bioships fall upon Blackheart's fleets in huge numbers, and merciless combat rages between his forces and the Tyranids. The power of the colossal warp tempest in which they fight proves to be no detriment to the Hive Fleet, whose hive ships spawn neurobeasts and psycho-organisms at a prodigious rate as they accumulate biomass. End quote. Now I would like to round this one out with a segment on the weaponry of the Tyranid hordes. I've not done them previously, and these descriptions are deliciously concise. To quote, The Living Arsenal. Tyranid weaponry and war gear is entirely organic. Some examples, such as heavy carapaces of chitin armor, chameleonic flesh, or spore-spewing gas bladders, are integral to the warrior organisms that employ them on the hunt. The rest appear to be grown in the churning innards of the Hive ships and symbiotically grafted to the bioforms that will wield them. Tyranid warrior organisms and their living weaponry make for a repulsive and truly frightening sight. It is hard for enemies to perceive where the war beast ends and its armament begins, for the two are inextricably linked via pulsing tubules, chitinous growths, and membranous swathes of melded flesh. Few can fail to miss the vicious fangs and talons that almost all Tyranids boast, nor the slime-slick and quivering analogues of gun or blade that most carry. Yet in truth, any part of a warrior organism's anatomy may prove a weapon. From sacs of virulent toxins or corrosive bioacids, to fleshy barbs ready to stab forth and impale prey, or other, even stranger and more gruesome weapons. For those not trained in identifying such threats and counteracting them, a myriad of horrible fates await. Many warriors have met their end after believing that they had severed a Tyranid's weapons from its body, or after parrying an obvious blow from a chitinous blade, only to be impaled upon a concealed stinger, struck by tail-borne bioweapons, or enmeshed in lashing nets of secondary tendrils. In truth, the distinction between Tyranids and their wargear only exists within the minds of prey species. For every Tyranid is as much a living weapon as the symbiotes it wields. Moreover, the utterly alien nature and rapid adaptability of this organic technology is more than a match for even the most advanced prey races. It allows the Tyranids to drag their victims into a feverish arms race in which most prey are ill-equipped to keep pace, and that soon sees them outmatched, outmaneuvered, and fatally outnumbered. The Devourer. The Devourer is a deceptively simple projectile weapon whose barrel analogue is a long tapered cone of slowly decomposing meat. Inhabiting this fetid mass are colonies of squirming parasitic worms. By sending a bioelectric shock from the body through the cone, the weapon's wielder launches showers of ravenous worms at any nearby targets. These worms then burrow through their victim's nervous system until they reach the brain, causing such agony in the process that even those not slain are often driven mad. The largest devourers fire brain-leech worms, a particularly sizable and unpleasant adaptation of the basic bioform. The Flesh Borer. The Flesh Borer is an organic burrow within which dwell borer beetles. When the weapon is fired, it stimulates the beetles to launch themselves from the barrel with their flea-like rear legs. The creatures then spend their final seconds of life chewing frenziedly through the bodies of their victims. Flesh borers can launch from many different types of beetle, from creatures with hardened armored-piercing chitin to ones with biochemical incendiary fluid. The latter are grimly referred to as torch bugs. The Spine Fist. Usually wielded in pairs, spine fists connect themselves to their host organism's internal airways via rubbery flesh tubes driven into their bodies. With a sharp, acceleratory spasm, the warrior beast sends pressured air surging through its spine fist in order to launch a hail of chitinous spikes at the foe. These foul projectiles are coated with tailored neurotoxins, so the slightest scratch is fatal to the prey. That is, of course, if any of their victims survive being impaled upon dozens of wicked, chitinous shards long enough to feel the toxin's bite. The Barbed Strangler. The Barbed Strangler fires a seed pod the size of a human fist. The living ammunition is channeled from a bloated gestation sac by a thick feeder arm into a simple launcher that is little more than a muscle tube. After being launched by a muscle spasm, the seed pod grows to maturity at a grossly accelerated pace, becoming a flailing mass of hooked tendrils capable of puncturing flesh, spreading out in all directions with blinding speed. They gouge eyes, entangle weapons, and lash around throats before constricting savagely. Should it penetrate flesh before reaching maturity, the unfortunate victim is ripped apart in an explosion of gore, as sinuous tentacles burst out from their own body. Stranglethorn cannons are heavier versions of the barbed strangler, firing much larger and more aggressive seed pods. The growing seed pods' writhing mass of metal-shredding tentacles can tear apart vehicles as they work their way in through vision slits or chinks in their armored plating, shredding their targets from the inside out. Venom cannons. Venom cannons fire shards of concentrated and crystallized acid, coated in a metallic residue and launched at incredible speeds. Even the lighter breed of venom cannon is highly effective at punching through well-armored targets. Meanwhile, the heavier variant launches its weightier projectiles at hypersonic speed. The tank-killing rounds wreathed in an electrostatic charge that detonates upon impact. The Impaler Cannon. This cruel weapon fires chitinous harpoons that are more than capable of punching through even tank armor. At the base of each projectile nestles a parasitic shard beast that feeds off its projectile's internal fluids until the moment the weapon is fired. At that point, the shard beast's innards are torn out, leaving it trailing fin-like projectiles that it uses to steer its shard into the body of the victim during its last moments of life. The Death Spitter. A Death Spitter is a complex multi-creature weapon symbiote that fires large maggot-like organisms that possess highly corrosive innards. Next to the weapon's brooding chamber is an oozing set of fangs that drags a maggot creature from the nest and strips it of its protective shell with a loud grinding noise. The Death Spitter reacts to the caustic flesh split by the maggot's agonized throes with a violent spasm, firing the morsel of still-living flesh at high speed. The projected creature shrieks through the air until it strikes its target in a shower of volatile fluids and gobbets of caustic slime that melt through armor and flesh with equal vigor. The Scything Talon. Many Tyranid warrior organisms employ sizable, deadly, blade limbs to hack, tear and impale their victims at close quarters. Such weapons rarely exhibit any degree of subtlety, employing the simple expedient of putting massive strength of muscle and sinew behind a long, rigid talon of razor-edged chitin. Yet no warrior who ever saw these scything talons rip through an entire rank of screaming victims before tossing their bloodied and mangled remains through the air would ever mistake simplicity for ineffectiveness. The Bone Sword. Specifically grown from dense chitin, bone swords have a sentient symbiote grafted into their hilts. This small gobbet of neurotransmissive flesh takes care of regrowing the bone sword's organic blade should it ever be damaged. Moreover, its vast web of nerve tendrils are embedded along the entire length of the weapon, transmitting and amplifying the synaptic energies of the wielder into a lethal field that extinguishes victims' life energies with every blow. This effect is amplified by proximity to other weapons of the same kind, making paired bone swords especially deadly. Rending Claws. These oversized claws are rendered particularly deadly by their organic sheaths of diamond-hard and wickedly sharp chitin. With the tailored muscle and sinew of a Tyranid warrior organism behind them, rending claws are quite capable of ripping through adamantine and bonded ceramite as though it were nothing more than tattered cloth. The damage such vicious claws can inflict on living flesh can best be described as catastrophic, with a single swipe usually sufficient to disembowel or tear the throat from the prey. The Bone Mace. This unsubtle mass of gnarled bone, chitin spikes and coiled tendons is most often seen grafted to hulking carnifexes. A dense tangle of tense ligaments connect the bone mace organism to its monstrous wielder, their steely strength and instinctive whipcord contractions further augmenting the already colossal might of a siege beast as it swings the mace at its victims. A solid blow from this weapon can easily stave in a fortified bunker, smash a battle tank on its side, or pulp any foolish warrior unfortunate enough to stand in its path. Spore Mines. launched from biovore sporecaster organisms, or atmospherically seeded in their thousands from the bellies of hive ships. Spore mines are living bombs in possession of rudimentary intelligence. If they do not detonate on impact, they possess internal gas bladders that allow them to drift across a battlefield, and sensitive tendrils that trail behind them as they feel for vibrations of prey organisms. Once triggered, the spore mines detonate themselves, unleashing a violent storm of chitinous shrapnel and sprays of toxic, venomous, or acid fluids upon their unfortunate victims. Spore mines have been known to drift for days, just waiting for an unwary foe to come near before detonating with brutal effect. Predatory projectiles. The hive mind has proven monstrously inventive in its ever-adaptive arsenal of living projectiles. From blunt force trauma and violent impalement to bioelectric shock, acid corrosion, hemorrhaging detonation, or death by toxin. The ranged weapon forms of the hive fleet inflict all these fates and more upon their prey. Warrior organisms have even demonstrated the ability to produce their own form of bioplasma that is more than capable of reducing armored warriors to mounds of glowing ashes. Flesh hooks. Nestled within the thoracic cavities of warrior organisms, these chitin-barbed hooks are launched through violent muscle spasms. Not only do they inflict bloody wounds as they punch into their victims, but the sinewy cords that connect them to their host organism can swiftly be reeled back in, dragging impaled prey into the monster's embrace. End quote. And there we have it. Ha! A few lines of new information, a few tracts of details. Yet in these small morsels of information, we see further into the mind of the Devourer, its activities. For as I stated recently, the hive mind is showing clear signs of a deeper game. The beacons that shine psychic screams into the void, the pylons on planets. Not mere destruction and moving on. The full aggression towards chaos. This is no small thing. Once chaos was practically ignored by the bug, as were the Necrons. Yet over the centuries they have assailed the galaxy, they have changed. Now they strike Necron worlds as a matter of course, for they are able to metabolize and reap the harvest even from necrodermis. And chaos is no longer ignored, but confronted dead on. Dead being the word. And this is not a usual development for such a force as the Tyranids, for it strikes odd. If they are here in the Milky Way galaxy just to eat and dash, then why waste biomass on fighting chaos? They gain absolutely nothing from it at all. One cannot eat a dead Neverborn, they simply disappear when vanquished. And the cost in biomass is not just that for missed meal of the enemy, with warp flame, other psychic attacks, their penchant for fire, which destroys biomass in its conversion to light and heat. It makes sense in only one occurrence, for only one reason. If the Tyranids intend to not just consume the biomass of the galaxy, but if they intend to claim it permanently for their species. A harrowing concept indeed. Let us hope that the subsequent 10th edition codices have just that bit more zest to the lore. Now I am the first to admit that I always considered Warhammer 40k a setting, not a story. Alas, for better or worse, that statement is simply no longer true. See, I can learn. And since the cat is now out of the bag, since the plotline, as it is, must now progress inexorably onwards, let us hope they just get on with it. The Space Marine Codex will be the next one up, so we shall see very soon. And I have to admit, I am very excited for it indeed. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.